but we should start talking. Right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Know Your Worth. This is our 12th episode, which is hard to believe. We've been doing this for a year now.
12 episodes in. That's fantastic.
I know. I'd say we're already like beforehand. We're already talking about what are the next 12 going to look like, who are we going to have on. So obviously, if you have comments, you have feedback, who would you like to see? Let us know. We'll try and get them in. All right. So we look different. We got a new guest and a new host. Before we do, I should say, Jeff is alive and well. He has taken a new opportunity. We're really proud of him. He's moving into leadership at a new firm. We'll be announcing, I guess, sometime soon.
Very excited for Jeff.
Yeah.
Very excited for him.
But it allows us to sort of rethink Know Your Worth and how we're going to do this. So very first guest, 12 episodes ago, now host. You want to introduce yourself or reintroduce yourself for the crowd?
Yeah, glad to be back. So my name's Mike Wieger, Vice President of Mergers and Acquisitions here, working alongside Michael. And yeah, 12 months ago, was it right? About a year ago, being the first guest on this. And so it took a while for me to convince Michael to have me back. And then when I did, it was, hey, do you want to come back in a permanent capacity as a co-host? So very excited to be here and, future episodes with all of the guests we're going to have. I'm really excited for it. So my role here at Carson, when you think about Michael and I, we're really on two different sides of our M&A team.
That's right.
So our M&A team, we're kind of split into two groups. One is new to Carson M&A. So acquisitions of firms that are not yet on the Carson platform. And so that's on Michael's side. And whereas I work with all of our existing partners. So we have a lot of advisors all across the country here at Carson who still own their firm independently. And does an acquisition make sense? And our team goes a little bit further, which we can dive into here in a second. We help them in a lot of different ways. It's not always just in the context of a minority or 100% sale to Carson.
Right.
We do a lot of different things for them. But I've been at Carson for a while now, for about 7 years. And when I
that makes you a grizzled vet.
That is, we talk about Carson years, right? What is it? Times it by 3 or times it by 7, whatever. It's like dog years at Carson. Been here for about 7 years, but my role kind of shifted. So when I first joined Carson, I was actually on the legal team. So I was the attorney assigned to work with the mergers and acquisitions group. And then a few years into that, we really saw a need to really develop the existing partner side of M&A. We had a lot of partners who were raising their hand asking, can Carson help with insert item here? And a lot of it had to do with M&A type activity, right? Equity for next gen advisors, sales of the business, helping them do their own acquisitions. They were starting to ask a lot of those questions.
Right.
So
what's my valuation?
Yep. Exactly. So roughly 4 years ago, took off the legal hat. And now over on the M&A team, which, I really enjoy having conversations with business owners every day. It really drives me, fuels me. I love learning about them, what they're doing, and what makes their business unique and successful. I have yet to find two firms here at Carson who are exactly the same.
So anywhere. I had a mentor in a past life. She had a quote. It was, if you've met one independent financial advisor, you've met one independent financial advisor. And there's so much truth to that, even inside of our ecosystem.
So true. So true. And you would think that you would start to find similarities, and you do. You find similarities in things that drive them. But my favorite part about working with existing partners is I get to develop these long-lasting relationships with these advisors. And that really comes into play in M&A. And I think we'll get to that here in a little bit, but getting to know how their firm operates, kind of what part of the life cycle they're on with their firm is really important, because M&A, in my opinion, is very much solutions-based, right? An advisor has something they're trying to accomplish in their business, depending on what stage they're at. And an M&A type activity can be a solution.
Right.
And so getting in tune with, I just love always even just connecting with a partner on an annual basis. Where you at? How's your business doing? And then being able to say, you know, have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? And that might be a solution to something that you're trying to solve today.
Yeah. So I was jumping right into it. We had Bert on last month, and we had a lot of conversation around what makes Carson so different. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the conversation was around exactly what we just talked about, that solutions based. If somebody comes to us, there's something they're trying to solve.
Right.
And it's not always, I'm selling the entire firm. Now, when we started this live stream, it's interesting because it obviously was Jeff and I, we represent the external M&A. So a lot of the focus was around what should a buyer look like and what's the process look like? How should I sort of think about it? Obviously with the mindset of we're going to educate folks out there that don't know anything about M&A, but every time they log into FA Mag or CityWire, they're seeing a headline.
Yeah.
And then just to be perfectly candid, it was for people to establish some brand credibility around Carson so that if they decided to sell, we're going to be one of the firms that they're going to pick up the phone and call. And that worked, but we certainly neglected a huge part of what makes Carson so different on the marketplace, which is what you're responsible for. So I want to dive into that. But real quick, we should mention this is not our first rodeo doing this together.
No.
So 3 years ago when I joined the firm, which was like 10 years, I guess, in Carson years,
right.
You know, we had a conversation around, we need to establish brand identity. You know, Carson was known as a coaching organization. We were known for this unbelievable 1099 partner model. Mm-hmm. We were not really known as an M&A company. That narrative has shifted. And as part of trying to shift that, you and I have been in the studio. We recorded a ton of YouTube videos and educational content and snippets, just trying to educate both our existing partners and the broader marketplace.
Yeah.
So we've done this before. The chance to work with you again was super exciting to me. It was like a no-brainer. And actually, when Jeff and I were talking about his planned exit, he said, you got to go talk to Mike. So, I'm ahead of you. Like, absolutely, we're going to do that. So
I'm excited. It's going to be, you know, put two microphones in front of us. It might be dangerous on the time limit.
That's why we got the timer right in front of us.
I think we got the timer right in front of us because we could, I mean, this is our passion, which is really fun. Talking about something that you're passionate about is exciting. And I think that's why we're going to enjoy it.
And I think it comes through. I think people hear that. All right, so let's dive in. When you talk about what makes us a little bit unique, and I think when we differentiate ourselves from the broader buying market, a lot of that is that we didn't get into this purely from a financial transaction aspect.
Not at all.
So our history is not in acquiring and rolling up firms. No. It is investing primarily in our existing partners. So do you want to talk a little bit about what that means and why that's unique in the market?
Yeah. And this even ties back to 7 years ago when I joined the legal team. When I joined, we were just wrapping up our first minority transaction with a partner.
Yeah.
So one of the very first things we did is we kind of came up with this minority concept where we came in, and really the idea back then was invest alongside each other, come close together, success from both sides, benefits both. And so we did a handful of those about 7 or 8 years ago. But then, kind of like I mentioned, my shift from the legal team to the M&A team came from, and going back to your point on not being totally financially driven on the Carson side, was primarily we had partners raising their hand saying, you know, Mike, I've got Joe down the street. Joe is another financial advisor. We've known each other for years. We've always thought about merging, but we don't really know, like, what's the tangible next step to take? How do we go about doing evaluation? What do deal structures look like these days? How am I going to finance this deal? Should I use equity or should I use cash? Should I use a mix of both?
What are the tax consequences?
Exactly right. So
we should also mention you've got a background in public accounting too. So
I started my career at KPMG before I came here.
This is not new to you either.
Not new to me. But this is more the fun side.
Right. Exactly.
Getting to apply it within transactions is a lot of fun. And so when I made that shift, that being the primary driver of having a solution for our partners, I think we did 30 plus deals in the first 18 to 24 months that we developed that program. We're able to help. So what we saw was we had a lot of advisors, and for most advisors, that was their first deal they had done.
Oh, absolutely.
So what we saw was, hey, when you have the resources, when you have a team behind you, it kind of activates this lever of growth that a lot of our advisors hadn't thought about before. And we have multiple examples of firms who since that time, so give it 3 to 4 years, have seen exponential growth through acquisitions.
Yeah. Mark McCallum is a great example.
Exactly,
like an absolute deal ninja, as David DeVoe would call him.
Yes.
The guy has done 10 now, 11. I mean, he has a mindset around it. He has a protocol around it. He has a standard deal that he operates out of.
Exactly.
So, I mean, that is it's exciting to talk about. Now he's part of the family. Like, he is a Carson Wealth office that is now going to impart some of that wisdom to other partners that want to go out and do exactly what you're talking about.
Exactly right. And if you think about it from a Carson perspective, Carson didn't do an acquisition during any of those transactions. Right. That was Carson's partners, so our independently owned advisors across the country doing their acquisition that we're helping them with.
Right.
And so that was kind of the unique part, which was helping them with that. And then alongside acquisitions, there was more than that. It was an advisor raising their hand saying, I have this amazing advisor in my office. They've been with me for 10, 15 years. I think it's time to get them some ownership in the business.
Mm-hmm.
How do we go about doing that? And what is this? What are the ramifications for me? How do we need to structure it? What's the difference between an LLC taxed as a partnership versus an S Corp? Like all these sort of little details that was kind of again, giving our advisors the toolkit. I always joke with our advisors that let us be your nerdy numbers guys, right? Like let us take off those hats
let
you don't want to
wear.
Let you be the
nerdy numbers guy.
Yeah. in a transaction, let us be that team that can help you. And the other unique part about that too was we have now, especially over the last few years, we have advisors who are still looking to do their first deal. We have the deal ninjas, as you referred to them, like with Mark McCallum, who have done them over and over. So my role and my team's role in helping these advisors changes depending on the advisor and depending on what they want. Some advisors love jumping into the numbers with us. They want to model it out. They like that. And
they want to know the why behind it, which is always fun.
Yes.
Like, why would you value this firm more than this firm? And, what's the rationale or the math behind it?
Right.
Yeah.
And others, they want to focus on more of the relationship with the advisor. They want to kind of focus on, the why of why that advisor should join their team, and let us just focus on the numbers. It varies on how we help our partners. But I think when you talk about what kind of differentiates, Carson is truly that offering from us where it's we are here, pick up the phone, call us. We're here to help you with whatever you're trying to do. And that all comes back to, again, being solutions based.
Yeah.
This is something where different firms are looking for different things, and we're here to help no matter what it is. Are you looking to do an acquisition? But that also leads into liquidity events, which is a big one. So, part of what I haven't really dove into yet, which is, so yes, we're helping our partners do their own. But part of being solutions based is offering that solution when the time comes that they are considering either a partial sale or a wholesale. And is Carson the right fit to be that buyer?
Right. Yeah.
That's kind of a big part of it.
Yeah. And we're going to get to that because that is where we have seen so much. You have seen so much activity, especially over the past 18 months. And I think there are finite reasons for that. And there are reasons why there is a tailwind there for years and years.
Yeah.
Especially as we bring in these new partners that just demographically speaking are nearing the point of their career where they're looking for some level of liquidity. I think one of the other things that so impressed me about you, I got to see you in action at one of our Excel events, our national conference 2 years ago. Yeah. We sat down with a prospective seller and the conversation was around that G2 equity. And what I saw from them, they're asking the question, and as far as they were concerned, there's only two ways to do it. It's either cash or full equity in the firm. And then you kind of dove into, have you thought about Phantom? Have you thought about a SARS program? And seeing the advisor's wheels start spinning, because it's a foreign concept to them. Like, they never do that. These people got into the business to be a financial advisor, not corporate structure or governance or operating agreements. So seeing that, it was unique. Because I come from the BD side of the house. Like, you don't see that from a corporate dev team or even an M&A team on the BD side. It's much more focused on like a large scale transaction with hundreds of advisors, and it's all or nothing. There's nothing in between.
Right. And, it's kind of, if you think of yourself as, I think of like, if you're in a woodworking shop and if the advisor is the woodworker and they're really doing the best, my job is to look at the wall of tools, look at what they're doing, what they're building, and show them, here's 4 tools that'll get this done. Which one do you want to think works best?
Sure.
Right? A hammer is not always the best tool. A screwdriver is always not the right tool, right? You need to know what tools are the best. And so to your point, whether it be stock appreciation rights or actual equity, there's so many options. And a lot of that, though, is behavior based. You have to know your people and what's going to be the right solution.
And what's going to motivate them.
What's going to motivate them. Exactly
Yeah.
right. Stock appreciation is such an amazing tool, but it's not right in all circumstances.
No.
And you need to have the right individual who thinks the right way for that to be a good motivating factor for them.
Yeah.
That we spend a lot of time talking on, what's the right tool for the job. First of all, what are we trying to accomplish? What are we trying to build here? And then look at our options and say, okay, it looks like this might be a really good tool for you to use.
I am so happy you said stock appreciation too. On our first episode, we even talked about we can't use acronyms. We do it so much in this industry. We have to try and spell things out. So I dropped SARS 20 seconds ago. You corrected me. So thank you. That's perfect.
Of course.
Okay. So let's talk about the pipeline or the funnel that we see or the life cycle of an advisor. Cause I tell the story every time I'm on the phone with an external party. I challenge them. So there's two questions you should ask any potential buyer. What's the cap structure look like and why are you different?
Yes.
And what are a reason that people join you? And I think this is the one story that we tell the most, along with just growth. But the idea that somebody can join us from coaching and then kind of go through the entire cycle. Can you take a minute and just walk everybody through an example or what we typically see for an advisor that follows that process?
Yeah. I mean, that life cycle can look different, but to give one quick example, we had Joel Worsfold and he was out of West Des Moines and Joel really spanned the entire gamut of all the different stages of a firm here at Carson. He started out as a coaching member. And then
so he's a Wells Fargo private client.
Exactly. At Wells Fargo.
He was another firm.
Exactly. He was a coaching client, really started to look at everything at Carson. And then when he was looking deeper into does partnership make sense, decided that Carson was the right home. So kind of said, okay, I kind of want to take the next step with Carson. And when he joined Carson as a Carson partner, he also decided at that point that a minority transaction made a lot of sense. And so when you're looking at that from a coaching to partnership where we don't have any ownership and then jumping straight to minority. A lot of that made sense for him when you think of things like brand, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you're coming out of an area like Wells Fargo, you're going to be setting up your own entity. You don't have your own brand yet.
Stagecoach and Ponies are the brand when you're at Wells Fargo, right?
So if you're going to have to build your own brand anyway, does it make sense to utilize the Carson brand right away? And that was a driver for it. But at the same time, and this is going to be a common trend that we're going to talk about for the rest of the session, is rollover equity is really important too.
Yes.
So when you look at that minority, it's diversification.
Mm-hmm.
It is saying, right now, for the most part, these businesses are these advisors' largest asset that they have. And so they're looking at, okay, right now I own 100% of that. Should I diversify a little bit? So, especially a few years ago, the big idea around minority was diversify. Then when you sell 25% of your business, you still own 75%, a lot of that growth. But in that chunk of the 25%, a lot of our advisors were taking Carson equity. So again, it's not a pure liquidity event from a cash perspective. It's diversifying. Now I own a majority of my firm. I own a little bit of Carson, who they're on a great growth path as well. And so that made a lot of sense. And then about a year and a half ago, the final, not final stage, but the next phase for them was considering 100% transaction. And did that make sense? And here's one thing that I think is really important, and especially it's been a conversation over the last year is, in my opinion, it's kind of framed as a liquidity event for one doesn't have to mean a liquidity event for all.
Yeah.
And so in that environment for Joel was nearing that retirement stage. And so for him, he was looking for that liquidity event for himself, but he had a lot of other partners alongside him. So a lot of much younger advisors in a different stage of their cair, growing like crazy.
Some of the sharpest dressed advisors we have in the
that
network,
team is
we got to make
fantastic.
sure we tag Matt and Jason.
Yes.
We have Matt if we don't. Rebecca too.
The whole team over there they're some of my favorite people. They are just amazing people. So when you look at that, you have young advisors who are still in growth phase. And so again, for them, right, even if Joel's looking for a little bit more on the cash side for his liquidity event, it was rollover equity really provides a lot of options for those other advisors.
Yeah.
They had ownership. And so when you can roll that into Carson equity, you still have the upside. And when you start talking about figuring out compensation and deal structure, because here's what was interesting, Michael, over the last year, what I saw on the existing side was the average age of advisors that were deciding to go 100% sell of their business was a lot lower than what I had seen before. We're starting to see firms doing it earlier and earlier.
Yeah.
And I think it'd be interesting to talk about like the why behind that and what it is. But I think what we were able to do really well here was try to get really creative with structure that left a lot of incentive for the other owners who weren't looking for that major liquidity event.
Yeah.
So again, liquidity event for one doesn't necessarily have to mean liquidity event for all.
Yeah. And you look at that firm in particular, and they're exploding. I mean,
yes.
They're bursting at the seams right now. Like, it was the best decision they could have made. And we have 3 extremely motivated, highly influential partners in the office. So it's interesting. You talk about the age thing. We're seeing that too. And I there's the old joke, right? Like, half of all people in the world reduce things into 2 categories. But I mean, really, there are succession plays, the advisors that are looking to exit, and if there's a retirement horizon, and there's the capacity play. And it's, we need to grow, but we have hit a wall. And Bert talked about this actually last month when he talked about Michael Kitces and sort of that wall around 500 million to $1 billion, depending on the size of the firm. And you get to a point where you're making a bet. And when you talk about partnership or a minority deal with Carson, this is where it also comes into play. Can I grow faster on my own? Or can I find a partner, somebody like Carson, that's going to allow me to outsize that growth and focus on doing what I love?
Yeah.
And we're seeing more and more of those firms. We actually have an HOV next Monday of a firm where we're looking at 3 principals. One of them is 5 years older than me. I mean, this is a guy that's 48, 49, 50, I don't know. And he's looking at not getting to $1 billion, but very forthrightly said, I'm going to go with the firm that's going to get us to 2, 3, 4 billion. So he wants Carson equity because that is diversification, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
And I think we use the phrase, or you hear in this industry, taking chips off the table. It's not. It's just different chips on the table.
It is. It's different chips at the table. And here's the other interesting part. So the 2 most common conversations I'm having with our existing advisors when they are considering 100% sale is, number 1, it's maybe about what my day-to-day is starting to look like.
Yeah.
And so I really love being an advisor. My time is being spent being a CEO, and I want to change that. So that's number 1.
Yep.
What does my day-to-day look like, and what will it look like if I sell? But number 2 is, how can I grow? And how am I growing? So obviously what we've talked about now is the equity play, and now you're diversifying, and now you get to leverage from Carson's growth on there. But here's the other piece. We have seen a lot of firms who have historically been very successful with M&A, doing their own acquisitions. It's a tough market right now if you don't have a partner that gives you scale.
Oh yeah.
And here's what I mean by that is if,
and you're talking from a perspective, like inorganically growing, like going out and doing your own deals.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if you're a firm and if you're an advisor who has, over the past few years done some acquisitions and you've been bringing on firms, you've probably seen that get harder and harder. And the cost of capital is going up, right? Interest rates are not where they were a few years ago. So the cost of capital is higher. And also with all the players in the market, we're seeing the multiples climb a little bit. So if you are
a little bit, I like how you say that.
Well, a little bit.
Yeah.
So if you're a 500, $1 billion, $200 million firm trying to go out and compete and do these acquisitions, it's got more and more difficult.
Yeah.
And so what some of our advisors have said is, I'm losing a little bit in the ability to play in that pool. So potentially does a sale to Carson where I still get to go out and do that, but with the scale of Carson behind me,
right?
Does that allow me to win and allow me to grow? So it's the Carson equity, it's the scale that we provide in M&A with how difficult that's gotten on the individual basis. So when you talk about the firms that have come on recently and the average age coming down a little bit, a lot of those I think is because they're looking at it from a lot of different lenses. Number 1, what does my day-to-day look like? Number 2, rollover equity. So, okay, so I still have a lot of great upside. Number 3, the way I've been growing through acquisitions maybe is changing a little bit. And do I need kind of the bigger weight of someone that provides that scale?
Yeah. So our second guest was Trey Wilty, a close friend of mine now down in Kansas City, one of the first external acquisitions we did. And, you look at Trey and here's somebody now that is regularly winning multi-million-dollar business owner clients that are going through a transaction of their own. He's been through the process and he's sort of acting as an M&A advisor for some of these clients. Paul West here in Omaha does the same thing. And for him, having that team behind him that can provide transaction support and expertise and let him bounce things off of us, that's really motivating for him. So that was his next. I mean, that was one of the reasons that he, as part of a 3-person or a 3-founder team, was looking to transact with Carson. And man, those are so much more fun. Not that advisors shouldn't be able to retire when they want to, but when you're helping somebody to, design or sort of game plan the next 20 years of their life, and they're super motivated by that, Like those are gratifying conversations to have.
Completely. And that's what that's why I'm so passionate about my role, is no matter what stage a firm is at here at Carson, I get to be right alongside them.
Yeah.
And so we talk about 10, 15-year plans quite a bit when I'm talking to advisors, because in the beginning, a lot of times it's, okay, how are we going through M&A? How's your organic growth? What are we doing? How are we going out and finding young talent and bringing them on board? And then it kind of shifts and it grows along with them. And then the next few years, minority might make a little sense for certain reasons, right? And then it's shifting over to 100%. So working with them the whole time on that 10 to 15-year plan is extremely important, and it's gratifying. It's fun seeing them be able to execute on that every single year.
Yeah. And I mean, there's nothing more satisfying in my opinion than having a closing dinner, being able to celebrate with somebody that sold, is happy they sold, letting them see obviously the financial impact of that, but also what life's going to look like post-transaction, and see the excitement on their staff, their face. It's so much fun to see that. Okay. So let's talk about just this explosion we've seen over the last couple of years. So we mentioned with Bert transitioning more towards a practitioner-led firm and bringing on this expertise that is now going to be deployed across our whole ecosystem. So Russ Nealon, Debbie Taylor, Mark McCallum, three extremely intelligent, high-powered individuals that are going to give back to the community. You were involved with all of them.
Yes.
But why do you think there's been this explosion of interest from inside of our community over the past 18 months?
It's a great question. I think I want to answer the practitioner one last. We'll get to that last. But they kind of go back to my first 2 points, which is day-to-day and how do they want to grow and what do they want to do? And I think that day-to-day is actually starting to hint at what you were talking about, being practitioner-led.
Right.
We have some just amazing advisors here with talent across the board in different areas, right? If you think about Debbie Taylor, Russ Neal, and Mark McCallum, their expertise is in 3 very different areas, right?
Oh yeah.
Debbie is just, all things tax. She's a genius. I love working
There
with her.
is no advisor we can introduce her to that knows more than her.
No.
Tax planning. And I mean that
yes.
Literally. I mean, she is brilliant.
100%.
Yeah.
And then Russ Nealon, from how to operate $1 billion plus firm, just operationally bringing those team members on, bringing them together.
And organically growing like a machine.
Growing, yes, like a machine. His organic growth with that firm has been amazing. Mark McCallum, from an M&A perspective, how to structure deals and how to tell that story, that why you'd want to join, the power of rollover equity, how to manage a large team once you've done acquisitions. That's actually an interesting piece, which is you do the acquisitions and then all of a sudden you look up a few years later and you've done them and like, wow, okay, now I have 30, 40 individuals here when it used to be just 5 or 6.
Yeah.
That massive growth and being able to manage it in the right way. That's something that Mark McCallum has done great, right? So when we bring those individuals in, those are, again, other experts that are coming in being practitioner led, that we get to utilize and have them really tell us what works out there in the real world, which is great.
Yeah.
So
Russ has been participating in home office visits when we have prospective sellers come see us in Omaha. We had Debbie on the phone with somebody that has signed an LOI and will be joining us here probably in May. And being able to hear from 2 people like that is hugely impactful on the sales process, or at least on the due diligence process for that seller. Yeah.
And so I think it really does come back down for a lot of the main individuals. And again, we mentioned 3 of the leaders of firms that are also full of amazing talent, right?
Yeah.
Those are kind of the 3 figureheads of firms that represent a lot of amazing talent. And so the reason why I think is because we've been able to come up with a solution. And again, kind of going back to that liquidity event for one doesn't necessarily mean for all, but in all 3 of those transactions, those are advisors with a long runway in front of them.
Yeah.
They're in each of those transactions. We don't have an advisor who is stepping out or retiring. So it's even more fascinating. It's wow, you're in a period of really good growth. All 3 of those firms, we're seeing massive growth. Why does it make sense now? And it's all about structuring a deal in a way that still provides all the upside in the future while allowing them to wear the hats that they want to wear and taking over certain abilities. And again, going back to 2, the allowing them to grow in the way they want to, giving them the scale, especially on the M&A side, is extremely, I think enticing right now.
Yeah.
And so the question historically has been, okay, this might be a good transaction for me, but I'm worried, is it good for the rest of my team? And that's been a big focus of ours over the last year, is coming up with deal structures that are good for not only the main advisor and the lead advisor or the majority owner of the business, but what works well for operations individuals, advisors, other partners, and allowing that, future incentive for them to stay engaged.
Yeah, I had mentioned, Debbie was on the phone with the seller that has signed an LOI. They'll be joining us. And the way he phrased it, which I thought was so well said, when he was here in Omaha, I asked him, I was like, what are your motivations around a transaction? He said, I've got 3 constituencies. He goes, I'm going to be taken care of. I know I'm taken care of wherever I go. He said, so 1, it's got to be better for my clients. Like, I need a lift that I can show every client, like, this is what you're going to get access to. He said, 2, I need it to be good for the buyer. Like, I want a buyer that's going to look back on this 3 years from now and say, hey, this was a great transaction. I'm glad that XYZ is part of the firm now. And then he said, in 3, I want there to be upside for my stakeholders. My employees have to feel like there is now a career path in front of them that is beyond just our local firm.
Yeah.
And that is almost every transaction now. There is a conversation around, are we properly incentivizing not just the founder or the advisors, but the stakeholders, the support staff, the operations folks, the marketing folks? Do they feel like there's something beyond just the day of the transaction closing?
100%.
And I don't think that's going to go away anytime soon. I mean, that's, people are wisening up to asking the appropriate questions.
And I will say, it's one thing for you and I to have our conversation on the why and why a partner does it. I got the opportunity. Debbie Taylor actually came to town, and we'll have some videos here shortly coming out where because I really wanted her to explain the why for her.
Yeah.
For her, I mean, just a few months before we were doing 100%, her and I were working on her 5-year plan and how that was looking, and 10-year plan, and for the firm. And so that, and
it wasn't sell the whole thing.
It was not sell the whole thing. No, definitely not. Right. And she has a lot of really cool dynamics. She has family members working with her in the office. So we'll share those out too in the coming weeks here. And I think that, again, practitioner-led mindset, the why. And I think each of them, if you were to ask just those 3 examples of the many that we did last year, I think they would all give you different answers. Again, talking about how no one firm is the same. But typically there was 1 or 2 little trigger points. There was something where, again, us being solutions-based, and it was, what are you trying to solve for right now?
Yeah.
What is it? Is it you're trying to get your liquidity event, but the valuation's a little too high for your G2s to afford? Is it, hey, growth from an M&A perspective is getting a lot harder? How do we amplify that? Right. Is it, I am wearing way too many hats that I don't want to be wearing in terms of CEO? It could be really nice, Carson, if you guys could do the HR aspect and the bookkeeping and, the coaching and all those sort of things. So I think those lead to a lot of really interesting conversations.
Sometimes it's a health scare, unfortunately. Like there's a sign of mortality, and people want to make sure that they're planning for their legacy. It's, you're talking about the triggering event or the straw that breaks the camel's back. It's so wise. I mean, I 10 plus years in business development before I came over here. And I am firmly of the belief that you're not going to convince somebody to sell that doesn't want to sell. Likewise, you're not going to convince somebody to change, broker dealers or RIAs that's happy with where they're at. There's always something there. There's an underlying thread. And then it's the final event. It's the IRA distribution that doesn't go out. It's the client paperwork that gets lost. It is the situation with a G2 that can't afford to buy in. There's always something that prompts the conversation, which leads to a much better discovery interview and process for us when we start asking about the why.
Exactly right. And I think when you start to get to some of those triggering moments that lead to that, and then from my side, obviously being lucky enough, I'm working with partners who are already here. Like, wait, so I can accomplish my goal. The valuation that my team puts together is exactly the same as what we would do a valuation for an external firm. So I'm getting full valuation. I don't have to go through a transition on the existing side. Repapering. I'm already here. I don't have to get to know a whole new team. That's when you kind of start to check the boxes and say, okay, maybe this is an option that we should look at.
Yeah. So I think I might have diverted you a little bit, but I was asking about the why so much interest in the last 18 months. Because I do think, and maybe you're being humble on this, it's Carson's explosive growth too. So I've been here 3 years. We've gone from 19 billion to 42.
Yeah.
And I think there's a little bit of FOMO. I think we're seeing advisors watch Carson grow so quickly, and they want access to our equity or to be a partner with us on the cap table. And then I also, it's interesting with all the talk around, Debbie and Russ and Mark, we're now having advisors that they want to be a Debbie or a Mark or a Russ. Like they want to be seen as an expert in a field or a space. And there are people that are saying, hey, I've got, deep insurance background, or I have spent a number of years on the wirehouse side. I know how to lift people out, whatever it might be, which is exciting because we're adding to this community now and we're getting something a little bit unique in each deal. It's a talent play, not just a financial transaction, which is going back to what we were talking about at the beginning.
Yeah. The equity to your point, the massive growth, when we have essentially our shareholder meeting, right?
Yeah.
If you have equity, we have a meeting every year, coming to that. And I hope too, that when I'm having conversations with my partner, I mean, my excitement being an owner here, like shines through my legitimate excitement for the path that Carson's on.
Same.
And honestly,
there's a conviction I think that comes through when you're having a conversation.
Yeah. Yep. And it does make the math a little bit easier, right? When you're thinking about doing that, but you still have so much of the upside on the rollover equity with, performance that's proven, that can be a game changer for them.
Yeah.
In that conversation. It's very compelling.
Yeah. And there's not a lot of, there are firms, but there's not a lot of individual RIAs that are doubling in size every 3 years.
Right.
So especially from 19 to 42, it's a little bit easier to do it when you're at 100 or 200. And once you start getting into these big numbers, like it's daunting. So I think folks are going back to that capacity wall, making the decision, like, can I do this on my own? Can I buy it? Can I build it? What's the cost associated with it? Or do I just find a partner now? And that changes everything. Exactly. So you took my next question, because I was a total softball for you, which was, is there an event or something that precipitates this big pipeline building activity for you?
There is.
Yes.
There is. One of the intangibles that we have here at Carson is the community.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a big piece. And so every year, right, we have two main events. We have the Excel conference, and then we have Partner Summit here in Omaha. And every time you get our community together, there's just a sense of like, I want to engage a little bit deeper.
Mm-hmm.
And you hear stories from, the individuals we just listed, or other wholly owned offices or minority owned offices. Yeah. And they just start to have that conversation. And it's kind of like those trends, right? Of you think of any trend, a health trend or anything, and you hear a buddy who did it and they're having success with it. And you're like, okay, I never would have thought to do that right now. Tell me more.
Why'd you do it?
Why'd you do it? Right. And so sometimes it's just, honestly, it starts to kind of a wave. And so I think what we saw last year was the start of that, which is a lot of advisors don't, I think, anticipate, why would I sell again when I'm in this massive growth phase? I have 10, 15, 20, 30 years ahead of me still in my career. What would be the reason? And then it's sharing the story. Yeah. It's the experience of how that went for them, what it means for them. And again, it just comes down to, is that the right solution? It might not be for
you're absolutely
but it
right.
is for a lot, right? It's a great option for a lot. And then I think it's always interesting. Like we do have to mention, with what the market's done the past week, 2 weeks, it sometimes leads to some very interesting conversations.
Yeah.
And sometimes you would think, if the market's going down or having a weak moment, that it would kind of scare off sellers, right? Because you kind of needed to rebound. But sometimes you have advisors who are very seasoned who, they're like, I don't really want to go through this again. And this might be the point of like, if this is maybe what they're seeing for the future, it might lead to a conversation of this might be the right time. So it's always to be determined on what the market's going to do and how it's going to go, but it does shake up, I will say, conversations.
Yeah, it sure
and
does.
It changes the game a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, there's always, I think, in moments of uncertainty, there is a natural human desire to look for a safe harbor or some level of certainty. And I think when you can show consistent growth, even through down markets, which we've been able to show,
right,
that gets the advisor that maybe is a little bit more vulnerable to market movements to start rethinking their equity position, whether it is just in their local firm or in something larger like Carson.
Right. Exactly.
And there is a psychological component too, I think, of advisors that are not shareholders seeing the group kind of go into a room for the shareholder meeting. They want to be a part of it. I mean, I think I'm outside looking in, seeing these super successful people like a Mark McCallum walk into a room to talk about Carson equity. Like, I would want to be a part of that if I were not a shareholder.
I would too. Yeah. And
I want to follow that guy and listen or see what he's doing.
Yes. And we're such a community of listening right? And of different perspectives. And I love being in that room when all those owners are in there, right? They all have skin in the game.
And the questions they ask,
they're super passionate about it. And being able to share a lot of that information with them and also gather feedback on how they are responding to that type of information and directions we want to go. We have all sorts of advisory councils here, which I love too. And the great part about that is you don't have to be an owner to be part of those.
That's right.
We have owned and non-owned as a part of that. But again, that owners, it means something different. And it's just like in the local firm where being an owner, there's a different feeling, right? When you're the owner. And so that applies also on the Carson side.
Yeah. I'll just tell a quick story. So, I was here, probably a week or two. So this is 3 years ago. And I was here on the first floor at HQ. I was sitting in one of the conference rooms taking a phone call. And I look out the window. This is like January. It's freezing cold. And I see Omani. He's leaving the gym. He's in sports attire, like athletic gear. And you see him walk out the building. And there was like a Cheez-It wrapper or whatever in one of the bushes. He bends down, picks it up, walks it back to the trash can, throws it away, gets in his car and heads out. And I just like the humility of an owner like that, like stopping that extra level of care in being an owner it's just unique. It was fun to see, especially as a new member of the community. And I think that's sort of the motivating factor for advisors that want their G2s invested, is they want that same level of attention. Like they're going to be the ones that are going to go clean up coffee cups at the end of the day. They're going to be the ones that make sure the place looks sparkling when that big client walks in the door.
And I refer to that as the see a need, fill a need mentality.
Yeah.
And so when we talk to advisors about they're considering giving equity to someone for the first time, and I was like, there's a financial component, but there is a mentality and a leadership component. And when I say see a need, fill a need, to your example, when they're walking through, the lunchroom and they see the trash cans overflowing, do they do something about it? They see the need. Do they do something about it? Or they just keep walking, assuming that's someone else, right? And it's a different type of mentality that, I love that our advisors have, and that the owners of this firm, they have that type of mentality.
Yeah, I agree.
I've had so many advisors who have in the last year taken equity, and we'll have a conversation about something. They'll tell me about something they did, and I'll be like, wow, you really went above and beyond there. I'm like, well, I'm an owner now.
Yeah.
Like, I'm an owner. So like there's going to be,
so fun
incentive there. Yeah.
I can't wait to do the, just continue to watch this community thrive and grow as we add new people, and we're always bringing in new talent, which is fun. I mean, it's just whether it's external or tapping into a completely different gear that one of our existing partners already has, and then deploying them across the broader universe. It's been fun to watch. All right. So in closing, I love the question. Any bold predictions? Anything you see coming in the next, 18 months to 3 years or however long you think, but anything that you're looking to see or excited to see here at Carson or in the broader industry?
Just on a smaller scale, just especially in the near future, seeing what happens with these types of conversations, depending on what the market does.
Yeah.
Right. And just kind of a response to all of this and what that's going to lead to. But I think we will still continue to see the average age come down a little bit.
Yeah. I couldn't agree with you more.
I think number one, it's smart. How often have we seen, unfortunately, the wait till it's too late to do a transaction? And we're not sometimes able to solve for everything those advisors want to if it's being done too late. Whereas if we're having that conversation with 10, 15, 20 years of runway, we can get super creative with structure. Just this past month, we've been working on a few deals where it's even stretching my creativity brain on trying to solve for what that advisor is looking for. Very young advisor, a lot of important things to them when it comes to them, a lot of important things for us in terms of, again, going back to that practitioner led and putting them in certain positions to even thrive more at Carson. So being able to have that creativity lens is really important. So I think we're going to see more and more. And again, talking about kind of the domino effect, when you see those firms start to do the 100% sales, it leads to questions of maybe that might be the right solution for me as well.
Yeah. Well, I think the market's getting more sophisticated, more and more advisors. You talked about it just inside of our community with advisors that know somebody that's transacted with Carson, but I think the broader independent community, more and more advisors know somebody that's transacted with somebody, whether it's Carson or one of our competitors. And word is getting out, and they're asking different and better questions when we get on the phone with them the first time. They're hiring a banker that knows what they're doing. And we're not talking about revenue multiples most of the time. Like they're right off the bat asking me about bottom line cash flow and EBITDA multiples and structure and growth contingencies and all of these more sophisticated things that you didn't see from an average seller 6 years ago.
I'm so glad you brought that up. So maybe here's my new bold prediction is, my day-to-day is filled with, I work with advisors who we don't own any of them, right? They're in that partnership model to minority to wholly owned. So I work with them all, love them all. And so when I'm working with them though, you're right. The level of sophistication on deals in general, what the market's doing, or even general interest in it, whether they're doing it or not. That level of knowledge and sophistication has really come up, and I love it. Right?
I do too.
Because they're starting to become passionate about it, and even if they're not looking to do a sale of their business now, they're wanting to know the KPIs that we would look at for valuation on their business.
What's a KPI?
Key performance indicator, right? So if you have those, I almost went out of my brain there for a second. So what they're asking is Mike, like, I don't just want what is the multiple of EBITDA or what is the multiple of revenue. It's tell me the key metrics so that when I come back to you in 5 years, I'm going to go kill it for 5 years. Right? I'm going to go grow like crazy. Give me the things that you guys are going to look at so that I can accomplish that goal. And I love that conversation because a transaction right now doesn't make sense for everyone, but they're saying, hey, in 5 years, 10 years, it might. And if I'm trying to achieve the highest valuation I can, help me along the way. And I'm more than happy to do that, right? More than that, because I want to see them accomplish that goal.
Oh, yeah.
And so I think your point is spot on the level of interest and sophistication around how these deals work is growing, which I love to see.
I had I did an article last week in Investment News. It was talking about the idea that you're never more valuable than 7 years from retirement, especially if you're in growth mode, because you have a long enough runway for a buyer like Carson to model in some growth. You have the ability to bring in G2s. There's just more optionality around it. And if you fail to plan more than 7 years out, you are leaving dollars on the table without a doubt. And where you don't want to get is the advisor that now has 2 years left. And they say, I want to be out in 2 years. I'm selling this thing. I'm going to work through a transition. You can't anticipate growth. So it makes the investment a little bit more challenging from both us and obviously from their aspect. So I think we're on the same page here. All right. So first episode, this is great. We went 46 minutes, which is not atypical for either of us.
Perfect.
I have a feeling we're going to do this quite a bit. We're going to be getting the warnings from our production team. So huge thanks to Tori and Josh. We appreciate you guys. Thanks for putting this all together. And we'll be back next month, hopefully with a guest that we can introduce.
That's really what I'm excited for.
We got to put together I know.
Bring in the experts.
That's right. We got a lot of people to call.
I love it.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.